So our team works to sort of be helpful and supportive of students as they, I guess, lean into their college experiences, whether they be undergrads or graduate students. And some of my responsibility is to figure out like how to be supportive. So much of the work that I do is, for lack of a better way of thinking about it, is trial and error in working to sort of be supportive to students. And so what I'm doing here is just trying to figure out like a couple of things, like how, when you think of internships, like what are you thinking of and what is the information that you need and want, which is more helpful to you. So I have built a presentation sort of on a container of thoughts and thinking of working with students over the years and running an internship program for Native people. And I've taken a little bit of what I'll call how we think about the work that we do in reference to career readiness and development. So I'll be walking through some of the interpretation of how I have been driving the idea of thinking of career readiness in a cultural context. So, but to start us off with, I want to do a grounding exercise. I try to incorporate this into when we spend time with students so we can just sort of be better and helpful to ourselves. So if you all could just close your eyes for a minute, take a deep breath. And I want you to think of a place in nature that means something to you or just sort of fills your heart and brings you happiness, relaxed feelings, whether that be in the forest, near water, in the desert, just somewhere in nature where you're by yourself and you get to listen to the wind and feel the air. And I want to ask you to bring your friends and your relatives in, people that mean something to you, and join them and see them with you in that space, standing around you. Greet them, shake their hands, smile, wave, acknowledge your presence in that space. And I want you to think of people who have gone on, and elders or mentors who are still like remember and hold dear to you, and invite them to be with you today and ask them to be helpful, and then thank them for coming. And I want you to think of something in that space, whether it be animals, a butterfly, tree, air, mountains, rocks, whatever. Acknowledge the bits and pieces of that environment around you. Be appreciative of them. Thank them for showing up. Thank them for being a part of your world. Thank them for being this place of safety and comfort and support for you. Now I want you to think of the sun, whether it be rising or whether it be setting or whether it be in the middle of the sky. Acknowledge it, thank it for being there, ask it to help you and help it give you to be listening, to learn, and to ask good questions so that makes sense to you and to all of us. Take a deep breath. Open your eyes. All right, well, thank you. So as I mentioned, our presentation today is basically to sort of help us understand a little bit more about like what internships are. I know that there are, when we talk about internships, we think of like being paid to do work. We think about like other opportunities to sort of like grow professionally. Sometimes they're really, I'll say, intense, for lack of a better way of thinking about them, and sometimes they're really not. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the academic terminology, and then also talk a little bit about like how I said we structure it and how we think about it. And then I'll talk a little bit more about like what are other ways of gaining experience that may or may not be internships, but sort of hold that same sort of structure. I hope this plays through. I did click on the right buttons, but this was so I in an attempt to be helpful to owner and to a request to create an internship, I created a opportunity for students at 3 schools to create videos, PSA specifically, to help us, generate more content to be useful for students. This was an II student, Rizal Banali, and she created this video. The fun thing about it is that as we were talking a little bit about internships, and then we invited the different students to apply, her meeting with me kind of is what sort of generated this video, because she was like, well, we just don't know what internships are. As she was asking around and sort of thinking about what is it that she would want to put into a PSA about internships, or even just sort of learning outside of the classroom. And so then she decided that she would create this video. So we'll play it. It's a little bit comical, but it's really good. I enjoy it a lot.
It's graduation day. You have your degree in hand. You and your peers have spent the last 4 years of college life studying, staying up late, and cramming for exams. But now, what are your next endeavors on your career path? How has college prepared you for what's ahead? This is Alvin, the life of the party. Grade point average, a surprising 3.563. Alvin enjoys stickball and going to the gym on the weekends. Alvin doesn't know what he's doing with his life, but he does love 49s. Just kidding, Alvin. Alvin studied business entrepreneurship and maintains excellent relationships with his professors. But now that he's graduated and officially out of college, can his success transcend the classroom and into a career? This is Evelyn. She loves ridiculously oversized powwow bling and canned salmon. Yummy. She has a, well, not so impressive GPA, a 3.214. Okay. It's above average. Evelyn graduated with a degree in museum studies and is confident about her future despite her above average GPA. Evelyn actually has the upper hand over Alvin when it comes to post-college success, and it all started with an internship. During the summer before her senior year, Evelyn took initiative and contacted her school's career advisor. When Evelyn inquired with her career advisor about opportunities she could utilize to further her educational experience outside the classroom, her advisor provided resources that resulted in Evelyn's internship. Let's review what exactly Evelyn did to complete this process. Step 1. Do your own research. That's right, be proactive. Evelyn used popular search engines to help her find the right internship. Step 2. Network on campus. Evelyn found many resources available on her campus. Your academic advisor can assist you with any questions. Step 3. Check your email. Evelyn's college sent her periodic emails pertaining to relevant academic advancement, such as scholarships, internships, and workshops. So, stay on top of your email. Step 4. Keep your resume and cover letter updated. Just be prepared, like Evelyn. And finally, Step 5. Follow up on your application. Showcasing dedication is key when impressing potential employers. Evelyn followed up with her application, which showed her commitment, perseverance, and merit. With her internship, Evelyn earned an important place in the modern-day workforce. She garnered real-life experience within her occupational choice. She was mentored by professionals whose passions parallel her own. Evelyn created a career-oriented network. Statistically speaking, students who have completed internships with potential employers are more likely to secure a position with an entity in their field than students who have not completed an internship. Regardless of grade point average or positive professor relationships, Students who have completed internships are happier with their jobs due to the fact that they know what they're getting themselves into. The important part is that they actually secure jobs after college, while students who do not complete internships may not be so fortunate. Students like Evelyn go far after college. Students like Alvin do not. Right, Alvin? That's right.
So as you can see that there, it sounds pretty easy and simple to think about how internships can be useful for the long haul. But, the thing is trying to figure out like, what do they actually, like, what does an internship really sort of entail? In that video you saw Evelyn go through and sort of participate in a variety of, it's sort of inferred that she participated in a lot of different activities while doing her internship at that museum. But the thing is that when you think of an internship, it is a variety of different things that could be, in quotes, useful or helpful. And when we think of internships, we often think of like developing a professional sort of like capability, capacity, but trying to tie in the idea of like, why am I going to school? What do I want to do in reference to sort of the afterlife of school? And then what do I know I can do and what do I know I can't do as I sort of think of the direction I want to take after I graduate? Those are some of the, the important questions that I'll probably focus in on the next three workshops. So here I've given you a very academic, the National Association of Colleges Employers definition of what an internship is. It talks a little bit about experiential learning, which is just a really sophisticated way of saying on-the-job training. We talk about integrate knowledge and theory learned, which is basically Evelyn was a museum science student, and she was taking what she was learning in class and just sort of doing the actual sort of application of some of her learning at the museum. And then, with the practical application of skills and development, professional setting. So again, working in a museum, trying to understand and master her understanding of what skills are needed, to be, in quotes, a success within that museum setting. And then also give you valuable applied experiences to make connections to professional fields, and then considering for career paths. So there are a number of things in here that I think are pretty valuable. In the video, they highlighted staying connected to your professors, which I also think is really great, but staying connected to people who are actually doing the work and then building into what we call the network. She was, it was inferred that she was in the museum, and then in that was making more connections. And I talk a little bit about this in our third workshop today, where the valuable return on internships is basically the relationships that you build. So one, you can think of it as a skill builder for sure, but the most important part is basically sort of helping you learn a little bit more about bridging the gap between going to classes versus going to work. And that's sort of like the, figuring out like the employer, the opportunity to guide and evaluate talent. And that's sort of another part of that thinking is like, so if I am wanting to work in a museum after I graduate, then I should probably do an internship or work in a space that would allow me to learn more about what does that look like outside of the classroom study or working environment or academic environment. And then you can understand like what the skill sets are and what opportunities, because once you're in there, you may learn that, oh, I don't necessarily want to build exhibits. I basically want to do research. Or maybe you're an accountant and you want to like do finance and other things that sort of support the museum. So there are a lot of different type of jobs that are needed within that construct of museum. And I've also included the Council of Advancement for Standards in Higher Education, the CAS interpretation. This is a little bit more simplified. It's a formal education system, so it's about the things you learned and the things that you can co-create in learning. So, there are some design programs that, some of the programs are designed to help you, one, step into an environment where you're just basically just sink or swim, in quotes. They put you in the space and then you do what you need to do, and then you take away what you take away. Others are, really pragmatically designed to be helpful. Like, okay, so go in, learn to build a relationship with this person, learn a little bit more about how this thought theory or construct is integrated into the work that you do. And so it becomes more specific to that. Student progress and timely completion of educational goals. So this is actually talking a little bit more about what there's scholarship that says that, research that says that students who do internships seem to be more committed to their degree completion and have a quicker, take on a quicker pace in finding work and have a little bit more capacity to find work. And, the assumption in that is that because the student is able to sort of be in an environment to do things and test out their capacity and their ability, they gain confidence. They know a little bit more about how to use the language that is useful to that environment. And then they also indirectly, if not directly in some cases, have relationships that sort of usher them into spaces that encourage them to do complete and find, and develop goals that they can, are achievable. And this is a huge piece, I think, for what I've worked with Native students about or on in this space is, preparation for students for their career, citizenship, and lives. When we ask students in our student survey, almost 95 or 98% of the students respond that the reason why they're going to school is to help their communities. And so, that's really hard to know what that means, because it's there's so many things that our communities need support in. So it's trying to, figure out and how to parcel out what is, individual capacity and ability, and what does that look like when it turns into a job, and how do you master all of the bits and pieces about doing work so that you can be supportive to a number of different aspects of sort of community development, support, growth. And that goes beyond sort of the way that many people think about it, like, being tribal leader, because there are people who run the bureaucracy of the tribe. So there are a lot of businesses, there are a lot of departments, there are a lot of programs, there are a lot of programs that are situated near tribes, but not run by tribes. There are other businesses that work with tribes that are nowhere near them or located. And there are businesses that we work with constantly that are looking to impact, influence, and support and, develop tribal communities. So it's just sort of thinking about, like, how does this really grow for you? And we'll get into that in the third workshop today with how do you make this most meaningful piece? And then student learning and development, pretty straightforward. Oops. Another breakdown. So I just, wanted to give you some examples, so when you think about the work experience and you think about your professional development, and then you think about the concept of future employment, here are some different ways of, putting it into thinking. Summer position to learn how a business is run, pretty broad, not a lot of depth to it, but it's focused on learning how this business sort of functions and does what it's supposed to do. So there's a broad, aspect of, like, my learning is going to be a lot, and it may not be too specific or honed in on something that I guess sort of drives me to sort of do a specific task. Working with a specific office within a business to learn what skills are needed to be successful in that position. So I worked with a student where she wanted to be an executive director, but had not had a leadership role in a nonprofit. And so when we were talking a little bit more about, like, what does that look like, we began to think critically about two things. What has she done in the past that sort of sets her up for, in quote, success in an ED role? And then what are the skills that she lacks? And then from there, we thought of like, what would be a good space to sort of step into a learning environment. And that was basically enough for her to get a job as a director within a program. It wasn't an executive director, but she now runs a program. And this is her first leadership role after working years and years and years of supportive roles that were close to or assistant directing type of, positions. And then a short-term position to learn more about a position to determine if there's a role you may want in the future. So that is the same thing as sort of like trial and error and thinking of internships as a mechanism to sort of test an environment. Like if I want to go work in the outdoor industry, I get an internship at REI, and then you realize like, I do not like REI, I do not like the outdoor industry. So now I want to do something completely different. I had a student in a program I ran, and she was in her fourth year last semester, and she came to do an internship in HR. She did an HR internship, and she was working in the BIA, and she came to me kind of almost at the end of the internship and said, "Oh my God, I hate HR and I do not want to do this." And I said, "Well, you're graduating in a semester. What are you going to do about that?" She's like, "I have no idea." And I said, "Well, don't start over, graduate, and then figure out like what other internships you could do to sort of be helpful." She's like, "Well, I wish that I had done an internship at least 2 years ago so I could have learned a little bit more about like what it means to work in HR." Because she was thinking like, I thought that I could be, a people person. And I'm like, well, HR is more paper pushing than anything else in policy development within a space. And she's like, I know. And I said, so, but there are other departments and divisions within HR. And we had more chats about talent development and recruiting, and thinking about where those jobs are, which are in corporations and other businesses. So she wasn't too far off from where she was. We just had to redirect, like, how do I know more specifically, like, could this be something that could be helpful for my future? And so at the College Fund, this is what I created to sort of think about the, as I've taken some of the information from students, I've centered reciprocity in the middle, because I think that most of the students who are attending university, who are Native, still want to learn how to give back to their community. And so this process sort of starts at the top where, ways of being, integrating your self-awareness and your worldview, which is a cultural sort of take on the world, into something, and sort of drafting that, underneath that that interest and value space. So if you could take your values and what you're interested in and put that into a framework that could lead you, it could help define a career path so that you're like, ultimately, I want to be of service in this way. For example, my interest is I really love working with older people. So I love elders. My values are respect, and my values are, let's say that you hold food, because I hold food as a high value. And so what you want to do is like, I would love to feed elders. So what does that mean in reference to a career path? Is it a restaurant, or is it working, in an elder nutrition program, or is it working with elders, in some other space? Do they have to be Native? It could be that you work with, a city department that runs nutritional programs for elders in the community that, are broadly, situated within an environment. So just sort of thinking more intentionally about how do you define you, and then seeing if there's a way that you could mash those up to sort of think about how jobs are, important, or what skills you have or don't have to move that through. Then we'll talk about storytelling later on today. Relationality is basically sort of here where, it is situating yourself to know like what it is and what you don't know. So when you think about an internship and that it's about a learning environment and a learning space, you have to be really critical about what it is that and what you don't know. And then you have to sort of help yourself by saying like, these are things I should learn, and these are things that I think would be super useful to know if I move forward in this path that I've decided to sort of work with elders, because if I don't know how food and elders sort of come together, my goal then is to figure out like, how do food and elders come together? So look around and see if there are jobs, volunteer opportunities. If you can get a paid internship to do that, there are ways to sort of do this, paid and unpaid. We push for paid because those are really valuable structures, but sometimes it just sort of happens that you just need to go out and sort of do something and then see where you find yourself and sort of finding the next stage. And then, ways of knowing are part of just taking all the things that you've learned and then in that spirit of reciprocity, giving it back to people who are either coming after you or are wanting to know a little bit more about like, what was that journey like, or what information can you give me? And then you can form your ways of being as you go through this iteration over and over again. That's the thing that I think is super valuable about this, is that it's never an ending process. As you can see, there's healing, letting go, and there's evolution and networking. So it's always about building community, always about building relationship, and then sort of growing as you do that, because you change, you develop, and you tell your stories in different ways over time. And so a couple of things that I'll pinpoint here, internships change the way you see and believe in yourself. So I've given it some of this contextualization, ways of being, and worldview. An internship, you go in and you are in an environment, you do something. I've heard this literally where, students said, there was one student who came to me and said, I'm tired of just seeing a whole bunch of non-natives working on these issues for Native people. And he goes, why is that? And my response was, because there aren't any natives who are applying for these jobs and are not participating in environments where they're like doing this work. And he was like, well, why is that? And I'm like, I don't know. And then he was kind of a little annoyed, and I said, well, what are you going to do about it? And he goes, well, I guess I'll get my degree and try to find a job that makes sense to helping Native people. And I'm like, okay, that's simple enough. But it was just that reality of knowing, instead of how he could be a part of the solution, was a very powerful moment for him. And it was just, that happens when you're in these environments where you're just sort of like, I don't understand why it is this way. Oh, now that I'm in the system, I understand why this is what I probably could do or know about myself to sort of change that direction. Internships offer both informal and formal mentoring opportunities, so relationality and respect. Again, people in an environment it's a holistic environment. So, I'm going to talk a little bit more about like, what does that mean? But you have people all over the place who are willing to help in an internship. When you become an employee, it's a little different, but internships and those environments allow you to talk to anybody and ask as many questions as you want. Internships help develop a sense of work. And that's another thing too that I think is very interesting, because, we talk about that concept of, if you find something you love, you never work a day in your life. If you find something you love and you do it every day, it becomes work. And then you begin to sort of understand like, oh, this is super cool. Work is not so bad. Work sucks sometimes, and work is, kind of useful and amazing. And it situates your understanding of your responsibility to the world and your capacity to be, to give back. And then internships help develop meaning, which is super philosophical, but it also gets back to, when I grow as an individual or person, I'm able to know a little bit more about like how I want to show up or where I can show up. Because the thing that I love about just doing and trying is that sometimes you realize that you are not built to be a nurse or a doctor or a social worker. And that is totally fine. But what it does give you an idea of like, oh, if I can't do it this way, then I know that I probably could do something in another way. So let me have another dialogue or conversation about that. So then it opens up a little bit more of like, when I think of service and when I think of my interests, my values, I can apply them in many ways. And that gives you a little bit more sense of confidence and a different reality in reference to sort of change and making a difference in the way you think of yourself. And again, I'm just going to walk through this, the ways of being, the opportunity to engage with the professional environment, impact a person, how a person reflects upon their skills and performance. I think at the core of this is really the idea that you have to really understand who you are enough to know like how important a opportunity or an experience will be, and sort of thinking about the future. So, when you're making these decisions and thinking critically about an internship, find out a little bit more about like what it is that you have great interest in, how you hold your values together, to sort of think about this could really be meaningful and powerful. We have been working to offer up funding to students over the past few years, and I remember working with a group of science students, and the some I had so many takeaways, but I'm going to talk about one specifically where, because it seems so nuanced and so interesting. There was a gentleman that we worked with, and he's a very quiet person, but he loves bats. And when we gave him an opportunity to do research, he was already doing, he already had class and he had a research project that he had to do. So he was looking at bats. And when we, funded him to do that deep dive into bat, topic, when we met him and he talked to us about his presentation and what he was learning, his appreciation of bats was so cool, because he was like, I understand how they support the world, and I know what they do for ecosystems. And if I can be helpful to figure out like how to combat this disease, I'll be able to help farmers in this area in this way. And he knew specifically how the bats fit into the ecological system that he was in. And he knew how they worked and what they did to support the farmers and growing patterns. And all of that stuff just seemed, so natural and so enriching. And we learned so much from him in 30 minutes that we spent with him, just because he found out that, this disease that they thought wasn't spreading to bats across the country was. And then he found them, and then now he was trying to figure out like how to create effort to support more education, more knowledge about that disease and the way that bats sort of provide and are useful to that environment. And that was super cool. So when you think about what does it mean to do an internship, like really dig deep into there and own it a little bit more, because I think that was super awesome and it was so helpful. And then when we get to that relationality and respect place, we're thinking of, again, the space that one where you are walking to environment of trying to figure out like how to give back, and you are integrating that respect or that responsibility in a respectful manner to learn from other people. And so when you're thinking about that relationality and you're thinking about that commitment to reciprocity, like you have to know like how you do in the world, like what is it that like what is your space, like what is your talent, what is your capacity? And that happens through conversation. We call it mentoring, but really when you sit down, you find someone who is willing to listen to you and talk to you and sort of give you insight about how you perform and how you do things and how you can master some of the challenges that you face internally. Like that is a very cool, like awesome moment. And it happens so, seamlessly sometimes, and sometimes it's a challenge, but internships, like they provide you the capacity to find people who think and are doing just like you. That's something that I tell students often is like, when you have decided on an academic track or you're thinking about it and you're looking for an internship and you're doing something, in the space of social work, don't limit yourself by just being native. Think of yourself about being a social worker, and then think about yourself as being, who does this work and can I talk to them to find out more? And then who is, where is this work being done in the way that I want to do this with children in a hospital, in a school, in a research setting? And then you go to that place, and in that space, you find people who think and talk like you, and then you begin to build more of that community, that network. And then that in turn helps you to understand like where you situate yourself in sort of coming forward in the world. And that's where the relationality comes. That's where you sort of work with other people. So the world around you, community around you, relationships around you inform your way of being. which I think is another critical part that we don't really highlight all the time within internships. And then in reciprocity and responsibility, so this really is about that same sort of concept of relationality, but thinking more along the lines of what I know and what I don't know, and then helping you sort of draft, two things: a plan to sort of think about the future, and then also a goal. So if I know that I want to be a social worker and I know that I do not like talking to people, then I should probably go to an environment where I can talk to people and learn how to do that, or find a way that you can sort of dig deeper into talking to people and understanding like two things: how can you use your skill set as a listener, and then how do you use your skill set and to confront the challenge that you're sort of looking at, this idea of talking to people. And then you do that in real world settings, where you get a chance and an opportunity to sort of do a number of things. Something I told people, so just thinking about talking to people, one of the best trainings I had in my whole life, and even though it was as a career track at the time, was waiting tables. Waiting tables is the most horrific and horrible job you will ever have, but it is one of the most rewarding because you learn how to talk to people and you learn a lot about human dynamics. When you're managing a human in the space of food, it's interesting, but also like when you're trying to sell people food, it's interesting. And so there's just any number of things can really, any number of situations can, be helpful if you just think critically about the way that you want to use them to be a resource for your development. And then getting to the last, I just was looking at the time here and I wanted to get to any questions we had. Relationality and ways of knowing, again, like once you get into that space, you're thinking more critically about who you are, but also like, what do you need to do to sort of move things forward for yourself, but also how do you help people find greater sense of who they are, and you understand yourself enough, and as you begin to sort of teach people and share your knowledge and share who you are, that becomes another space of how you develop as an individual as well. And then you begin to sort of inform your way of knowing and leading to the forward of the larger aspect of learning. So other things that are experiential education that are confused with internships, apprenticeships, pretty straightforward. Like you go in, you work with someone, you learn how to do their job. Externships are shorter training programs, which are sometimes paid, but they basically sort of are to help you understand a component of a larger structure. Cooperative education is sometimes it turns into a job for the summer, and then you go back and you take classwork to sort of inform that, or you take classwork and then you go work. Research experiences, doing research, working with the faculty member, a team of someone, or an organization. And then practicums are jobs that are experiences needed to help you get a degree in a certain area. And then fellowships also are another part of this learning process too. And that is it for me. And I'm going to stop sharing to see if we have a few minutes and see if there are any questions.
We have a conversation happening in the chat with Angela regarding where to find internships. We did plug the next workshop session, which is exactly about that. So stay tuned or continue to keep on the Zoom, and we'll go right into the next presentation. But yeah, where to find internships. A lot of the spaces you can look at are professional development spaces. The Jack's newsletter also posts job postings, internships, different webinars. Connect, which all American Indian College Fund full cycle scholars have an account with. LinkedIn. There are some scholarship or some internships which you can choose and develop your own internship, which is pretty interesting. So definitely check in with your work. What do they call them? Work professional director
At the colleges, usually the
yeah career center. Thank you.
Career
Oh my
center,
goodness.
Yep.
Check in with your career centers. Typically they'll have more information on what internships are coming up, and then of course deadlines. I find most internship deadlines are in March, so it's always good to start early.
Yeah, and then too, if you are a scholarship recipient and you're working with one of our coaches, let them know, and then they can connect me to you too, and we could work on some of the things that more specifically draw out like what you're looking for. Because we have partners who prepare students to work in tech. We have partners who help students, prepare to work in business, real estate, and so we have specific programming that we could really get you tied into as a useful developmental piece. But Loyola is right. I'll be talking more specifically, and I actually will be going through our two tools briefly to show you how to look for internships in them in the way that I've described them in that presentation. Yeah, USA Jobs is definitely a space. The application for them is still really horrendous. Loyola had a presentation and a walk through the application, and I think it's available. Is that available, Loyola, the video?
Yes, it's on our YouTube page.
Okay, and we could probably get that to you to sort of learn a little bit more, because the process of applying for those is definitely very interesting. But that's a good question. Well, that's all that I have today. I'm sorry we didn't get into too much, and I hope that was useful. If it was, let me know. Let me put I think on this one I left my email on there, but I didn't share that with you all. But if you have any specific questions about internships and how I can be more, or how you would like me to be more supportive, then email me and let me know. Well, that's it. Thank you all for coming, and hopefully you'll come to the next one. Finding where to find internships is the next presentation. So,
Hey, I had a question real quick.
Sure.
So I had an internship last summer, and then I signed like some disclosure agreement or something like that. And then I got an email. I didn't really like the company that I worked with last summer. I think like it took them, I had to like mention something, and it was like took them the whole summer to do like an inclusivity kind of thing, like where they even acknowledged it, and like majority of us were minorities, so it's kind of weird. But regardless, like I just didn't really like the company that much. But and then I got an email, and it kind of made me nervous because they were like something about the disclosure agreement, and then having to like ask them for permission to work somewhere else is like the gist of it that I got. I don't know if you've ever heard of that or not. For
For
like
an internship?
yeah, it was
you
like
an
something
employee?
about their competitors or something.
I've not heard of that, but I'll say it this way, that if that's a part of their process, then it probably has some sort of legal bearing and standing. So I would probably just sort of look to see a little bit more, talk to their HR person to sort of get more clarity on it. That doesn't mean that you don't have to go back and work for them, but you could talk to somebody in their HR department to get a better, idea of like what it means, and then, then work around what it is that the language states. Because in an internship role, I've not heard of them limiting your capacity to work with a competitor. However, if you're working specifically in a coding department, that could be a thing, because you now have access to the codes they're using to some sort of product that they may be developing. And that might be the reason why they had you sign a disclosure agreement, because it's similar to sort of like you're selling our secrets, or you could take our secrets to a competitor. So I would get clarity on like, what I did versus what this means, because it may not apply to you if you are not so intently integrated into their coding process and their product development portion. So you could just get clarity on that a little bit more. Was that helpful, Brian?
Yeah, that was definitely helpful.
And if you need help, of course, you know how to reach me. So you and I can chat a little bit more.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.
All righty. Well, take a short break if you don't. And any other questions or thoughts before we head out? Cool. Well, then we'll wrap this up, take a short break, and then come back and learn where you can find internships.